let's go ahead and configure some axis switches. So in this experience right now, we have a normal vertical scroll coming down to over many acquainted curious of forgotten lore, curious volume of forgotten lore. And at this point, let's say that I want to, instead of scrolling vertically, let's scroll horizontally instead. So I'm going to take this text while I nodded nearly napping, and instead of placing it below on the next page of the scrollie, let's place it over here to hint to the user that, okay, at this section, maybe I should be scrolling over on the X instead. Okay, so to configure axis switches, you are going to go over here to this 4-arrowed button here and press it, and you'll see that we have a few different options here. So the very first thing is you need to configure the axis that you're starting with. So in this case, we're starting with the Y, and that'll give you an axis switch that you can position throughout the piece. So when you only have one axis switch, that takes precedence for the entire sequence. So in this case, we are currently on the Y, and everything will just be on the Y. You could alternatively make it so that your entire sequence is on the X. So you don't need to transition from one axis to the other. You can just use X or Y. But in this case, we want to do the transition. So let's go ahead and add the Y. And we're going to place that at the beginning, just so that we can be clear that that's what we want, is to have the axis at the beginning. And then once we get to this point, right, this is the point at which we need to transition to the X. So let's go ahead and add an X switch. And you'll see what happens there is during this moment, when we're transitioning between the Y and the X axis, there needs to be a certain threshold in which we actually accept input from both axes. Otherwise, the movement is not intuitive and it's a bit jerky, right? So in that case, this is what the yellow stands for. It is that transition point at which we're accepting input from both axes. And then the blue is when we fully transition to the X, right? And so we are going to then go and place this, we're going to now move the group. Instead of animating the Y axis like we've been doing up until this point, for the next transition, we will animate on the X. So we're going to pull this over like so. Let's actually go ahead and, just to illustrate, add a few more texts here. While I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. Okay, and so there we have configured our first axis switch. And let's actually get rid of these auto run markers for the moment, just so we can have the experience of swiping through this and see what it's like. So let's save draft and preview. And now we scroll, and once we get to this point, you'll see that the input accepts the Y input up to a point once we're through the transition, and then we can start using the X-axis, whether you're swiping or on a trackpad, to move through it. So if you're using a trackpad or are swiping on a mobile device, this is pretty easy and intuitive. If you're using a mouse or on a computer, it can be less so, especially if you don't have a trackpad. So we also have support for moving with the directional buttons. So right now I'm pressing the down arrow, the down directional button. Here, I'll show the keycaster. This shows what buttons I'm pressing. So that is another way that users can move through the axis switches. We also have support for WASD, WASD. And also, if you just scroll with the mouse and your mouse doesn't have a horizontal scroll wheel, you can press the shift key and keep swiping vertically, and and they'll convert the vertical input to horizontal input once you've come to a horizontal section. So that is at the basic level how you can configure axis switches. Importantly, we also have options for other kinds of switches, not just the X and the Y. We have the Y inverted, for example, and I'll explain a little bit about that right now. Okay, so let's say at this point we actually want to start going up. So we're going to configure a Y-axis inverted. Okay, and so Y inverted, that's because if we were just to continue scrolling normally, like for example here, scrolling up will advance the timeline, right? But here, if we were to have a regular Y, scrolling up would not be advancing the timeline, because I'll show you if we want to move up. Let's go to 5.1 and move this to 0. Okay, see, because we're still advancing the timeline, we need to invert the input so that we have the right values to continue advancing it. Okay, because typically swiping moves you down, right, not up. So that's just an important caveat to keep in mind if you want to configure these kinds of experiences. There came a napping. Suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. We're going to go ahead and save this and refresh it. And now as you scroll, when you get to the other input, to the negative y-axis, yeah, swiping up will indeed continue moving you through the timeline rather than the other way around. Yeah, and you can test for yourself if it is confusing to you, what it would be like to have a positive y here. I'll leave that for you to play around with on your own. And the same thing when it comes to the negative x-axis, right? So we'll need to configure that. Whoop. Eagerly I sought the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow. I am writing Edgar Allan Poe from memory right now. I don't remember exactly how the poem goes. Okay, so let's say at this point that we want to go back in the left direction. We can configure that. So let us place this text here. Where did it go? Okay, we're going to move this up here and give the users a hint that there's some text over here. Okay, so at this point we're going to activate the negative x. And then after a few seconds, we're going to transition, move this group back to say 0. I think we have some extra text here. Do we need that? I don't think we do. Okay, we can delete this node. All right, so if we do a refresh and now scroll, you see that we are now have this sense of moving through the space and even starting out right back where we started. And so, yes, that is a example of how you can use axis switches. Another note regarding axis switches, you'll notice that in a modern Ghost, when we have the axis switch, we actually use that in combination with the auto run to help a user get through that experience and make it as smooth as possible. So in this case, we have configured auto run, or rather the axis switch right at this point. And as we're coming into the transition, we've activated auto run and then have the user move through it like so. Okay, so that is a technique that you can also use. I recommend anything that you can do to make the experience more user-friendly. And we also have this indicator here to let users know that we're transitioning to a horizontal experience here. Okay. Something else that we're doing in order to make that experience as smooth as possible is we are changing the animation a little bit once we get to that point. So you'll see here that we are animating we're animating part B, which is the movement of all of these nodes. And so what we're doing here is we have a keyframe that is easing out right here, and then this keyframe is easing in and out to give us like this pushing sensation right before we settle on this keyframe, which then becomes a regular linear swiping experience from here to here. So that is something you can keep in mind and can play with as well when you're configuring your own auto run sequences to see how you can make that experience as smooth as possible for users. And I encourage you to test it out with your friends and family and see what they think of your axis switches and your transitions in your own pieces as well.